coming today. We have people here from Rochester, Buffalo, obviously Sandy Pond area. Anybody here from the St. Lawrence area?
Henderson.
Okay. Henderson. Okay. Great. Good to have you. We're going to be doing these rallies all along the lake. We'll be up on the St. Lawrence, we'll be in Rochester, we'll be in Buffalo. There's people in Toronto that want to do this. They've already, actually, people in Toronto have already filed a lawsuit. Why we're here today, we're not here to talk about Plan 2014 and what's causing the flooding. Okay, we're not talking about global warming. We're not talking about Lake Erie. We're not talking about rainfall. What we're here for today is to put together a group of people that want to fight and stand up for their rights, because this is enough. Enough is enough. They need to fix this. Why am I here today? I'd rather be at the beach. But there is no beach! I'd rather be fishing on my boat. But my dock's underwater. I'd rather be having a beer, enjoying my patio and my campfire. But my patio and fire pit are underwater. Enough is enough. Why are we here? Because an organization and 6 individuals decided they would knowingly implement a plan that would destroy our homes and properties to benefit special interest groups. That's why we're here today. 6 people made this decision. We're here today because 6 individuals currently cannot agree that after seeing the billions in devastation to our homes, properties, and businesses in 2017.
You can't hold the mic an inch from your life. It's just your mouth.
Is this better?
Okay, thank you.
Take the reverb off. That'll help.
So after the IJC has seen the devastation in 2017, seen the devastation in 2019, they don't think it's important enough to halt the 2014 plan. They sit around talking and talking and talking about it, while the special interest groups take them to lunch, take them to dinner, behind closed doors, negotiate. This is a war, people. It's a fight. We are up against some very powerful special interest groups, the Canadian and American shipping industry, the hydropower industry, the conservation groups that think this is a good plan for the environment. Well, that's a big mistake. Here's our current IJC commissioners that have been appointed. Some of them were not here back when 2014 plan was discussed and implemented and decided upon, but some of them were. They're all new? Okay. Thank you, Dan. However, they still can't decide what to do. After seeing all this devastation, they can't decide what to do. What would we say to them if they were here right now?
They'd be dead.
Jay and Corwin, stop damaging our property and our homes. Robert Sisson, stop damaging our property and our homes. Lance Yawn, stop damaging our property and our homes. Henry Rickard, stop damaging our property and our homes. Merrill Ann Fair, stop damaging our property and our homes. Pierre Boland, stop damaging our property and our homes. They think they have pressure now. Wait till 10,000 angry people show up at their house demanding that they change this plan. You want to destroy our properties, you're going to pay the price for it. We're here today because our government representatives and public administrators have failed to do what they were elected and appointed to do. They were appointed and elected to protect our constitutional rights, and they have failed at that. We're here today because our government representatives and public administrators who promised after 2017 that this would never happen again failed to provide oversight and monitoring. They need to do their job. We're here today because environmental groups still, to this day, as of yesterday, still tout the benefits of Plan 2014, while raw sewage flows into the lake and ponds from municipal sewers and from flooded septic tanks. That's great for the environment, isn't it, guys? Recreational boating is at a standstill because marinas are closed and docks are underwater. That's great for recreational boating, isn't it, guys? Why we're here today? This is tyranny, pure tyranny. What's the definition of tyranny? Cruel and oppressive government or rule. What else? How else can you describe it? They are intentionally destroying our property. Ruled by one who has absolute power without legal right. Who appointed the IJC? Who negotiated that treaty? Our government gives 6 people the power to destroy our property. That's crazy. Why I'm here today, and I hope why you're here today, is to fight against those who would take our land and destroy our homes. To fight against tyranny. Our forefathers fought, died, and started a revolution against tyranny. That's the symbol for this organization that I want to use. And for those of you that don't know, that flag was one of the first flags that one of the first flags that the revolutionary fighters used during the Revolutionary War, before the country was formally formed. But I think that signifies it. I think they're treading on us, don't you? Yeah. Personally, I will fight and die to protect my land and my home, and I hope you all feel the same way. I'm 67 years old, and I'm not afraid to die. So, call to action. All landowners, small businesses, and others that have been impacted by flooding. Announcing our intention to file a class action lawsuit against the IJC, against any other organizations that contributed to and implemented this plan. Seeking just compensation for damages in 2017, 2019, and any future flooding that occurs as a result of Plan 2014. Call for the repeal of Plan 2014. Calling for the adoption of a plan that protects landowners' rights, protects us from flooding for the foreseeable future, and landowner representation on the IJC board.
You didn't introduce yourself. Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. My name is Jim Shea. Started a new nonprofit organization called the Lake Ontario Landowners Association, Inc. Main purpose is to protect the legal rights of all landowners and small business owners in this along the lake shore.
Thank you.
You know, the town of Sandy Creek has been great during this whole thing. 2017, they were great. 2019, they were great. We have no issues with the town. I wouldn't be here today if the town wasn't at Rainbow Shores Road, plowing out the road and moving all the stone and debris that was on Rainbow Shores Road at 7 o'clock this morning. I could not have gotten out. But the town has been great. I want to thank the town and Margaret Kassler and Mike Kassler. You guys are here.
I'm Nancy Greensway, I'm the town supervisor. Thank you. Thank you.
But we need your help beyond plowing roads and putting out sandbags. We would like you to join us in this lawsuit, support us in our legal actions, and possibly fund those if you can. Everybody knows we pay more taxes to live along the lake. I think we deserve for our local governments to stand up to the state, stand up to the federal government, stand up to the Canadian government, and fight for us. We intend to file a criminal complaint with the New York State Attorney General's office against the IJC board members, past and present, and any conspiring parties for flood damage that were planned, predictable, and grossly underestimated. You're going to hear from two guys from Rochester who go back with this whole fight more than 10 years, way more than I do. Dr. Dan Barletta and Henry Stewart have been fighting this battle for over 10 years. We asked the FBI to investigate past and present IGC board members to see if any federal ethics violations occurred. You know, when you know the history of this whole 2014 plan, one or two things stands out, at least in my mind. One, they're totally incompetent. Two, they're so in the pocket of special interest groups that they basically do whatever the special interest groups want. Well, we are the largest, most powerful special interest group on this lake. We just need to all band together from Alexandria Bay all the way over to Toronto to fight this. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of people's efforts. I am donating all of my time. A lot of people have been donating their time for longer than me. But we will win this battle.
What about the people out in Michigan and stuff? They've got similar issues than us. Are they in this battle too?
You know, I don't know about that.
I had a
But
friend who talked to yesterday. He says it's terrible out there. It's higher than it's ever been. Well, I'm sure they must be. It all flows out this end.
Sounds like Gary.
We gotta keep with that too.
somebody intentionally damages your property, or through neglect or whatever damages your property, they're liable. They should be prosecuted and thrown in jail. They knew there would be damage. You know what they call us? You know what we are in this room? We're collateral damage. That's what we are. Collateral damage. Hi, my name is Jim. You can call me collateral damage. Okay, this is a resolution. You probably can't read it much. I didn't know any other way to put it up. Actually, I do have some hard copies here. It's a resolution by the town of Orleans. Albion, excuse me. There's one, Orleans County. But it says, it's been well documented, this Plan 2014 was going to cause extensive damage along the lake. They knew it was going to happen. They intentionally, purposely still put the plan in effect.
So what are we gonna do about it?
Lawsuits regarding flooding on Lake Ontario have been filed before and won. This battle's been going on since at least 1955. This is a letter, you know, every once in a while when a situation gets really bad, a hero emerges. And there's a guy named Norm Atterby who back in the 50s fought a 12-year battle against the Canadian government. And he won. He filed a lawsuit against the Canadian government, fought them, battled them for 12 years. And he won. Over the very same issue, the lake level.
What did he win?
12 million, I think. Back then was probably a lot of money. This is just an article from the paper back in '61. This is a lawsuit that was won out in the Midwest against the federal government. It's a class action lawsuit. One of the firms I contacted about handling our case, they called it a mass action. When I talked to the head attorney from that firm, he said that our action would be of historic proportions, and the largest one that they have ever seen. Anyway, they won that lawsuit just recently in 2018.
When did they file it?
That's a little description of the ruling. Isn't that what they're doing to us? They are taking our land by flooding. We can't use our property. Estimated damages for that are over $300 million. I think we're looking at damages in the billions of dollars. Okay, so what we need from landowners and small businesses, we need donations, and we need to start a social media campaign, volunteers to do that. The goal is to raise over $1 million for this lawsuit. When I talk to the people in Canada that are filing a similar lawsuit, that's a figure that they gave me. Some class action firms will take cases like this on a contingency basis or partial contingency basis, but we should be prepared, I think, to raise at least $1 million. And with 500,000 people that live along the shoreline here, I don't think we'll have a problem doing that. Especially if the towns and villages in the state of New York join in our lawsuit and would contribute to this. We need a fundraising committee. We need a social media and recruiting committee. Social media has brought down 2 countries in this world. With the power of social media, I believe we can get everyone along the lake, everybody that's ever been hurt or damaged by this, and get them to contribute and join in this lawsuit. We're going to start a GoFundMe campaign, which we can reach millions of people throughout the world.
Is that gonna be the best way to contribute?
There is no best way to contribute. There's a bowl right up here, and you can write a check anytime you like. I must advise you though, this is not a 501c3. This is not a tax deductible contribution. Set up as a 501c4. The reason for that is that as a 501c3, you cannot do political lobbying or stuff like that. 501c4, you can. So we're going to have to put some pressure on the politicians, the state and federal level to make this happen, but we have the legal right to do that.
Were our government representatives invited today?
No, I did not invite them. I think we've talked to them enough. I've had it with them. Oh, they talk, they petition, they write letters.
We
We
vote.
need action.
What's the name of our group, your group?
Lake Ontario Landowners Association. There's membership forms up at the tables up front.
You have a webpage?
Not yet, no. This is the first meeting, the very, very beginning. We have no Facebook page, we have no web page, nothing. None of that's put in place yet, but it will be within the next few weeks.
Anybody here from United Shoreline?
I don't know. I've spoken to both United Shoreline in Canada and United Shoreline in the Rochester area. They're aware of us. They're going to support us through, getting the word out to their members. There's a whole lot of small membership associations along the lake, all the way up to the St. Lawrence Seaway. Our goal is to get all of those small associations, get the word out to them, get them all to cooperate, get them all to contribute, and move forward with this. Questions?
I got a question. Do you think litigation is the best way to respond? Because if nothing else seems to work.
Yes, absolutely. No, nobody's got, the government is not.
Litigation, the best way to respond.
The government is not going to reimburse us 100% for our damages. My neighbor spent $30,000-$40,000 and could not get reimbursed a dime for that. Okay? So there are hundreds of thousands of people along the lake. Some got some reimbursement, some didn't. Yesterday, the $30,000 that I put into shoreline protection went down. So I'm looking at another $30,000 to $40,000 this year to fix what I thought would protect me.
Having been part of the grant money that was issued in 2017, if you've made the repairs, will that exclude you from this, is I guess where I'm going with that.
I don't think it would be fair to ask for money that you got reimbursed for. But what I'm advising everyone to do is to keep track of all the time you spend shoveling mud, chasing your dock around, doing whatever, putting sandbags out. Keep track of all those soft costs that you'll never get reimbursed for by any other way. So keep receipts, get bids, all the kind of stuff you need to do to get. The state is going to help us out. Okay, how much? It's a cumbersome process. I went through it, but the state will give us some relief, but it doesn't begin to cover the cost. There's so many business owners around here. If you're a fishing guide, for example, your business is down the toilet. If you're a marina, Kathy knows, her business is down the toilet. Are they going to reimburse you for the money you lost? Okay, well, a class action lawsuit will do that.
I have a question. Are taxes gonna be addressed throughout?
I can't answer that question. I would think that you would have a case for diminished property values. But who's going to buy your camp if it's going to get flooded every year?
I can personally vouch for taxes. My place is in the town of Ellisburg. Last year, my mother owned a property, she put it into her estate. from a personal ownership. It will transfer to me, and I will do that this year. However, I was the fortunate recipient that the tax assessor took that opportunity to raise my taxes, saying that I own more lakefront property farther out. I own more beach that's underwater. And I argued in my assessment that you were taxing me for land that's underwater. I got ignored. All because it referenced at the time when that transaction took place, a survey was referenced from 1990 on December 18th, I believe, probably at the lowest point, the water level. I argued that, hey, that's not fair to you, but it's not fair to me to use the highest point. You know, if I was to say, hey, it's the highest point, that's not fair to the town. It didn't matter, deaf ears. They love surveys in the county wouldn't change it, the tax assessment wouldn't change it. I got stuck. To me, that's unconscionable and an insult to injury. After all the damage in 2017 that I own, more property underwater, and I'm gonna get taxed on, this is literally unconscionable.
The governor wants your guns.
I'm not giving mine up.
Right now, I keep hearing that if something were done now, it would flood my job.
5 more years, you mean
Is
nothing.
there anything, honestly, that can be done right now to make this step going in the other direction? Does anyone know?
Okay, but question was, what, can anything be done now? Not really.
And my follow-up question to that is, what time next year do they need to start letting water out?
Well, they need to start letting water out now, continue into the fall. What's gonna happen is, plan's gonna call, once they drop below the trigger level. Once they drop below the trigger level for 2014, they cut back the outflows. So, like you have increased outflows now, another month or so from now, maybe like August, the water levels will drop below a trigger, and they're gonna shut out the flows. Hey.
Can you tell us who you are?
I'm Dan Bartoletta. I live in the town of Greece on the shoreline. Okay, well, it's given a note here. It says lake levels are used for hydro. I was actually going to bring that up in my part of my stuff. And it's owned by New York State, and I think back in the 80s, there was a group on Rochester area, it's called LOSS, Lake Ontario South Shore Council. They did a lawsuit. They had to settle because they didn't have money to go forward with it, but they won the right to go forward and sued the Power Authority of the state of New York.
Okay, Dan is up next. We're gonna take he's gonna just get set up. It'll be about 30 seconds here while we switch over computers.
What is New York State doing in the electricity generating business? They don't do a good job with New York State only. Why are they in the business of generating electricity and making money?
Okay, my part, I'm not as wild as Jim is, but I'm going to try and give you a little background on how we got to where we are. Okay, first thing here, this is our Great Lakes Basin. The colored area is actually where the water comes from, goes into the lakes. Okay, this is, this is, where's my pointer? I got the pointer. All right, we're about here. I'm down. Yeah. Right now we're like right here. This is Lake Ontario, St. Lawrence River, Ottawa River. Water flows this way. I had somebody at one of the meetings say, "Does water flow the other way?" Anyways, this colored area here, this gives you the size of the Ottawa River water basin. This is the size of the Lake Ontario basin. You see, it's about twice the size. And the thing with the Ottawa River, all their dams are up in this area. They have very few control dams down in this area. So when the water starts flowing in Ottawa, that's when they cut back the water on Lake Ontario. That's what happened this year. So you can't have too much water going through the narrows there.
Please speak up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just hold him, Mike.
Okay, how's that? Okay. So the Ottawa River doesn't have much control at the lower edge as it gets towards Montreal. So when the Ottawa River freshet comes in, there's 2 freshets, one in April and usually one in the beginning of May. Okay. So the water levels come up, the Ottawa River, they cut back on Lake Ontario because the maximum going through the river, I think, is around 14,000 cubic meters per second. So if Ottawa River is running at 7,000, it can only do like 7,000 on Lake Ontario. All right. So, okay. Yeah, okay. Just to give you some background. I've been involved with lake stuff since 1993 when my breakwater got destroyed. Back between 2000 and 2006, myself and Henry, who's up next, were on the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study. As part of the Public Interest Advisory Group, I actually ended up on the board because of people vacating. And I'm going to get into the results of that study. And some of you probably already know this, but I'm trying to give background to everybody. The study came out with 3 plans. Supposedly, 2014 is a derivation of one of the plans. It's a bastardization. It just bastardized the whole thing. But anyways, get back. As we all know, the water that comes in here, 85% of it comes from Lake Erie. Okay, so 85 comes in from Lake Erie, 15 from local, and we got right now. I think Lake Erie is about 2 feet above average, so we got a lot of water coming towards us. Now, a study that I just mentioned started out as a review of the current plan, 58DD. When Henry and I got on the study, the first thing that happened was they said, we're not going to deal with 58DD. We're not going to see if it can be changed to meet any of the current interests, like environmental and recreational boating. They basically took this chalkboard. They took the chalkboard and they wiped everything off. They said, we're going to start from scratch. So it's a $20 million study. It was 5 years. It was supposed to look at the 56 criteria, which is 58DD, and look and see if they can accommodate recreational boating and environmental. And as I said, it went for 5 years. It was a $20 million study. Now, part of the study, this chart, I don't know if you can see it real well, but there was six or seven interests. Rec boating, coastal, that's us, commercial navigation, hydropower, and the environment, and municipal and industrial use of the water. Shipping, yeah. Now, the study came up with these. This is just to give you an example. The top line is what the environmental group wanted the height of the water level to be. Now, if you look here, it's just a little over 247. Shipping, rec boating wanted a little bit lower. Navigation wanted a little bit higher. This is actually the curve for the coastal. The low of around 245 in the fall, with a max of about 246.6 in the summer. That would cause damages. I don't know where they came up with what 2014 does. The study came out with 3 plans, A, B, and D. A was what the economic plan, maximize hydropower, maximize commercial navigation, and D was the environmental plan, maximize environmental benefits. How many muskrats you got? Not many. Besides that, there's I I'm not a hunter, but I understand there's no bag limit on muskrats. And then Plan D was the balance plan. It kind of balanced between the economic and the environmental. This plan got put forth as the plan that IJC wanted to do, but the commission did say in the final report that they wanted Plan B plus, but it would cause too much damage. So they didn't want to go right to that. So after they sent out this plan, the D plan, they changed the name of it to Plan 2007. That went out for public hearings, and I'll be honest with you, I was probably one of the ones arguing against that plan. I wish I would have had foresight to see what they were going to do, because that plan had damages. And I got a chart I'll show you. Had some damages to coastal, but nothing like what's going on now. So Plan 2014 it's not one of the plans that was recommended from the study. It violates 3 of the principles guidelines of the study. It causes disproportionate damage to one interest, and that's us. These trigger levels that they put into the plan, they're set too high. On the high end, I don't want to get into technical stuff, but the high end is at 98% rate. The lake has to get up to 98% of its maximum level before they do anything. Okay. On the lower end, to help shipping, it has to only get up to, there's a 10% rate there. We're 2% at the top, 10% at the bottom. And you know, and everybody here knows when we build something, we build it to what the current plan is. I built my break wall in 1993. My break wall got destroyed, and I had to put in a new break wall. I built it based on the old plan, which had the range of 243 to 247. I added 6 feet on top of it because I did some research. In my part of the lake, most of the waves are 6 feet or less. So I built 6.5 feet on top. 2017, it was like I didn't have a break wall at all. I had a river flowing through my property. Okay, now this, and I know I can't see it in the back, but after the 2007 plan got panned, the IGC developed a working group. And it was basically closed doors. At least with our study, like Ontario study, we had public meetings, people knew what was going on. This working group is composed of all government agencies. We know that the environmental groups had direct access to this group. But you could see New York, we had 2 people. Now, look at the agencies, not the people themselves. New York had New York DC and the governor's office. The governor recently he doesn't like 2014, but his people put it in there. On the Canadian side, we had a lot of environmental groups there. Sorry. I'm not used to speaking in front of people.
We heard that though.
Technical difficulties. All right, I may have to switch to. Okay, all right, here's the slide. This came, the data I'm going to show you is all IJC data. It's nothing I made up. And if anybody wants to know what the sources are, come see me later. But between June and March and June, the amount of times the lake is above 247, with the old plan was about 3% of the time. With Plan 2014, over 11%. So there's about a 400% difference in that it will be over 247. Plan DD7, which was the predecessor, it's 2014 without triggers, Actually 12%. Now, this graph, basically, as I told you, we had plan A, B, and D. This shows environmental benefits, and this is compared to the old plan, 58DD. 58DD was the baseline. Plan A, the economic plan, had this much, this is a range of half. This is as good as 58DD. This is better than 58DD. So plan A was here, plan D was here, this is plan B. BV7 was a little better, a little less, and then 2014 was a little less on the environmental. But the damages, with 2014 on Lake Ontario are here. 58D is the baseline there. Plan D was there. So we actually had a little bit of benefit from Plan D. Now, what happened was, though, during this working group, the province of Quebec told the IJC they will not sign off on any plan that causes more damages to the river than the old plan did. So what happened was, our state DEC, get this to switch. Our state DEC said, we'll take the damages on the lake. So this chart here,
Thank you, DEC.
this bottom one here is the important one. Quebec damages with Plan 2014. This is baseline here. This is 2014. They have no damages. But the damages for us are up here. 58 DDs here. Okay? So there's no damages on the lower river. Damages are all on New York State DEC. Now this is just another bar graph. Counties, the damages to shore protection. Monroe County, where I come from, most of the shoreline's hardened. But by that, I mean they break walls, gabions, whatever. I got pile driven steel, which I guess isn't allowed anymore. But you can see it drops off on either side. It's, I know you guys got the damages up here, but you're more unprotected up here.
And these were just projections.
And yeah, these are
estimates,
these are
not reality.
Actually, these are projections based on the plans that were proposed.
Right.
This is in 2014. These are much worse for 2014. For unprotected, Orleans County, which is down by me, they're unprotected. They didn't have anything for up in this area here. I don't know why. All right, now this is a really wordy thing here, but basically we compare 58D is the baseline. This is supposedly the natural case, what would happen. Natural case meaning that they never dredged the river, and because when they built the project, they lowered the riverbed by about 16 feet. 2014 is right here. Now the major parties that get the money, hydropower. They're making an extra $5 million $5 million per year in comparison to what we're losing. We're losing, our damage is around, where's coastal? 2.2 billion. And those are low numbers, because one of the things we found out, and myself and Henry, we wrote, a few others wrote the minority report of this study. The cost that they determined, like shore protection, they said it was $1,000 per meter. A meter is 3 feet. I built my break wall, it cost me $1,000 a foot. So they were undervaluing things by at least 300. So Plan 2007, the one, Plan D, basically was minimal damages to everybody. It was very balanced.
You said $5 million that energy is
But that's in proportion to the damages.
minimal compared to what shipping makes?
No, shipping actually, I don't think I can get back there. Shipping actually is at zero.
They didn't make any more money, even though they could go out longer.
Well,
right through summer.
on the basis of what they were using for their data, we know that shipping can haul more water, they can haul more stuff.
in 2016, there were a number of ships on the St. Lawrence that were stuck in the river. There's a bunch of articles about that.
2018.
It was 2016 too. In 2017, they had record profits, the shipping industry. The lawsuit back in the 50s was targeted towards the Canadian shipping industry. So there's three very powerful lobbying groups involved here. The shipping industry, the hydropower industry, and the conservation.
And to that point, this is my second last slide. We all heard that the commissioner says that we're going to let the adaptive management group handle any changes to the plan. Well, I got a hold of Frank McLaughlin from the IJC. He sent me the list of who's on that committee. Yeah, there's I can send it to you. There's 30-some members on this committee. 9 of them are Army Corps of Engineers. The rest are all environmental agencies or groups. The Nature Conservancy is one of the groups. Yep.
Are you going to be putting a list of these out to the emails you're sending us so we can have access?
I did include this. If you get, I'm one of the writers of the Leveler. I don't know if you received it. Henry's my editor. We put this out already.
What's the website?
What's our website? Lora.org. It's LORA net net.org.
Will you say that again, please?
LoraNet.org.
Spell it.
LORANET.org. And I'll be honest with you, the webmaster hasn't updated all the newsletters, but there's probably about 25, 30 we have to put on there, but this will be listed there.
Will this slideshow be sent out to the emails we provide?
Good. Yeah. It's about four meg.
Oh. Or maybe
Put it on your
pages
website?
with all the different contact information that I noticed people are writing down.
When there's a membership application out front, I don't know if you signed, if you turn those in, we'll be contacting you shortly. But we need your name, phone number, email address, and all that, okay?
When are you gonna have a next meeting that, so that we go to a bigger, like a high school or something, where everybody can get in and hear and we can learn more and you can learn from us?
We can do that. Yes, sir.
The membership form, if we were able to take some with us, we could distribute them along our shoreline.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
There's no contact information or website or
That'll be set up in the next week or two. But if we have your email address, we can notify you.
Okay. I got two last points to make, and then I'll turn it over to Henry. One of the points was that when I was signing in today, I heard one of the women ask or tell somebody that we're covered under the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty. Actually, we're not. The three entities are domestic and sanitary uses of the water, commercial navigation, and then hydro. Domestic and sanitary use of the water is the number one thing. They have to make sure we have drinking water and we got sewage. Okay? Where we fall into being part of the process is when the old plan had a set of criteria. I wasn't expecting to have this question come up, but the criteria, as you recall, they set two criteria: high level and low level. 247.3, 243.3. But they had criterion K, which is the emergency one. We don't have a criterion K with the 2014. I mean, they think the triggers are, but the triggers are set too high. Now, this last slide is basically the old plan. 58 DD tried to target a 4-foot range. Now, we all know they were good at it sometimes, not so good some other times. Like 93, they went over. So it ended up being about a 6-foot range over the course of the last 50 years. Before they built the project, the lake had a range of 6.6 feet. So we only took off about a half foot. 2014 has a target range of 7.1 feet. And that means, and the top end of 2014 is 248.4. So the range actually very questionable with ranges. And we're 249, so it's got a 9-foot range.
I got a question.
Yes.
Does that take into account the storm surges?
No, no.
So that could be more yet.
Yes, where I am, we have like a 10 to 12 inch storm surge with the waves on top of that too. So you got, my break wall is built at 253.5. The lake's at 249.
That chart's wrong then.
What's that?
If you're having that range, that chart is wrong. You're always gonna have a storm surge.
Well, yeah, this does not take in storm surge. This is static water.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that case, it would be wrong.
It could be, yeah, much higher.
So 10 years to come up with a plan that did not take into account storm surge. Total incompetence.
I'm basically done. Maybe you've got questions.
We'll take one more question, then Henry's got to start.
Okay.
How about a comment? I have a report here from last week, ending in June 12th, and this is from St. Lawrence River Board Authority. And Plan A, we were talking about Plan A, Plan B, and Plan D. Plan A is 249.5. Plan B is 250.3. That's on this report. So it has to go up another foot before they consider it an emergency and they will step in. That's what you said earlier.
As far as the trigger levels, yeah.
250, that's another foot now.
Is that what?
And that's without a storm, without any surge. Another foot, we can handle another foot?
No. Can't handle what we got now.
What type of engineering degree would one possess to come up with a plan like that?
Well, the only engineer that was part of this study was Dr. Frank Scarabomano, and they let him go from the board.
Right there.
Okay, we're going to have Henry Stewart. I'll take one more question. Sorry.
Okay.
I believe we need to take immediate action to make an impact.
Yes.
We need to provide mail and email addresses to all of us who have signed up. We need to bombard everybody who we need to reach with letters and emails with supporting videos and pictures. And we need to email everything to us that we need as backup information to provide in our emails. The most important thing with anything is emails.
Yes, we're going to have probably one of the largest email databases in this whole region.
Actually,
No, but I know for us, we have to respond, and we have to personally send emails to everybody you think we need to reach.
We'll provide you with that list.
And backup information, so we know what we're talking about, other than our personal.
My recommendation, I live on Lake Ontario. I'm a newbie to this. I know this is the second year. If I'd known this, I never would have bought the place. I mean, 6-foot waves is nothing. I probably had 8-foot crashing into my place yesterday. But 3-4 weeks ago, I kept emailing Cuomo's office nonstop. So finally got a hold of Colleen Deacon and called me personally. So my advice is 2 times a day, email his office. Email Patty Ritchie's office. That's the only way, that's the only way we're gonna get any support. I mean, everybody has a story. I can tell you about, I got videos, I show my friends, like, what the hell are you doing?
What about YouTube?
Give us the email.
They're on the Cuomo's website. You can email it all you want. And you're gonna bombard it with, and he's not gonna be able to take anything else, the other issues that people have. If we want to be heard, we have to bombard his email address nonstop. Because we can raise $1 million. $1 million to these people that are making the decisions is nothing. They have deeper pockets than we do. It's guaranteed. I mean, people talk about don't pay taxes. You can't not pay your taxes. That's just not going to happen.
Well, you have to remember, we're gonna have $1 million, but we're gonna have a whole team of legal experts that's all they do is class action lawsuits. And they won this.
Take $10 million, give it to a lobbyist and lobby on our department. Why
We don't need $1 million to lobby. We can do just what you suggested. Every single day, email, call, and just constantly bombard them with emails and phone calls. We can do that. That doesn't cost anything. What I'm saying is that's not enough. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, they're going to come out with some other plan and call it 2021, stuff it down our throats, and do the same thing.
There won't be a 10 years for me. There's some
You're
urgency.
right. There won't be
Your
10 years.
litigation is a great
Right.
idea. That's the second
We
round.
don't have
of
10
two-pronged
years.
attack.
You're
I think
absolutely right.
we have to use the emails to bombard. I spoke yesterday with our representative, Barkley.
Letters to the editor.
And he spoke with me. And I think that we've got to grab social media. We've got to act today. This is not a tomorrow. It's today.
People have been doing that for the last 2 years. They did it in 2017 and they didn't listen. They did nothing. We're doing it now. They're still doing nothing. Okay? We need to agree with you 100%. Keep doing what you're doing. Bombard them. Emails, phone calls, whatever. What I'm saying is long term, it's not enough. They will come back.
If you go on the IJC website, there's 2 email addresses. Corbin on the United States and the Canadian side. You can email them directly. I wrote a letter, I'm gonna email it that way.
They've been here. They've seen the devastation firsthand, and they still haven't done anything. Nothing.
Right, but you're not going. But you can bombard them with emails. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, in deference, Henry came a long way to get here, so we're gonna let him speak now, and you can hold your questions till after he's done.
Hey, excuse me, I got one quick pertinent information about the DEC. I'm trying to finish a little project. I've got to build like 10 foot more break wall. And I emailed them about a month ago, and I said, you know, we've been declared an emergency. You've given me till, I think it's December of this year to finish this project. Can I get an extension on it? And they said, no way. I'm going to get just fined $7,500 if I don't complete it by the end of this year. And they said, no, you need to build coffer dams. You need to, if your contract can't do it, you need to hire an engineer.
Yeah, thank you, DEC.
Yeah, thank you.
Canadian government.
Okay, quiet down, please. Henry Stewart was on all the committees. He goes back more than 10 years with this fight. He's a lawyer in the Rochester area, and he's going to talk to us about what his experience has been and what he knows about this whole situation.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Thank you. And do tell me, please, if you can't hear me. I'll do the best that I can, as everybody else has. I have a lot to tell you this morning about deception and deceit with respect to how Plan 2014 came into being. I hope you'll listen to this history. I have a certain perspective as to it, and I hope you'll find it interesting. But as I say, I do have a lot to tell you, so I hope it'll be. My name, I'll get to that. My name is Henry Stewart, Henry S. Stewart, and I reside in Monroe County, near Rochester, New York, in the town of Greece. I also reside seasonally and have a cottage on the shores of Lake Ontario and Sodus Bay on the Crescent Beach Sandbar in the town of Huron in Wayne County. As you may know, the Crescent Beach Sandbar is the significant barrier bar and peninsula of land that separates Sodus Bay and Lake Ontario. I have been intensely involved with water level issues on Lake Ontario for 26 years, continuously since 1993. Soon after purchasing my parcel of land on Crescent Beach in 1991, and having my cottage built there in 1992, I became a member of the Lake Ontario South Shore Council. In 1993, I was designated as the president of the Lake Ontario South Shore Council, which is known as LOSS. Since 2014, I have also served as a director of LORA, which Dan mentioned, the Lake Ontario Riparian Alliance, and with Dan Barletta, I serve as editor of The Leveler, 110 issues of which have been published by LORA.
Thank you.
Thank Dan particularly. He writes it, I edit it. Thank you. Additionally, I'm pleased to have become a part of the group known as United Shoreline. Of significance to my standing to speak before you today is my service as a member of the International Joint Commission's Public Interest Advisory Group, abbreviated PIAG, P-I-A-G, which was intended as a conduit for public input and public outreach during the period of the IJC's International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Study. It is from the perspective that I witnessed as a member of the PIAG during its existence from 2000 to roughly 2008, and my continuing observations as a former member of that entity, that I believe I can provide a clear perspective to you today. And that perspective is enhanced by prior experiences as president of the Lake Ontario South Shore Council. For years and decades, the Lake Ontario South Shore Council endeavored to band shoreline property owners together to speak with a unified and shared voice and to address the actions of the IJC and the St. Lawrence River Board of Control in their regulation of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, particularly under the regulation plan that preceded Plan 2014, which we know as Plan 1958-DD. With no officer staff, I and other members of LOSS would repeatedly draft, print, and distribute lengthy newsletters, which we would seek to provide by hand, driving along lakeshore roadways, and delivering the newsletters to property owners' doors, telling of current issues, urging collective efforts. And continually we would speak on behalf of lakeshore dwellers and property owners' interests at public meetings of the Army Corps of Engineers and the St. Lawrence River Board of Control. And as we worked toward coalescence of interest to create a network of representatives from beach locations and shorefront organizations along the lakeshore, we found it extremely difficult and quite frustrating as people's interest in staying with the cause copacetically lessened when water levels comfortably dropped. During my tenure on the Public Interest Advisory Group, I temporarily deviated from endeavors involving that newsletter distribution, believing that my efforts in advocacy as a member of the PIAG were the best ways that I could serve the interests of lakeshore property owners. More recently, I have worked, though, to advocate through the online newsletter efforts of LORA and to assist United Shoreline as it has worked to band together property owners along the Lake Ontario shoreline and beachfront associations so as to stand collectively against the circumstances wreaking havoc along Lake Ontario's shores. And lately, as we have seen, that havoc has been enormous. Now, with no signs of water levels comfortably dropping, it is nonsense for lakeshore property owners to stay away from this cause. The IJC, as we know, has continually claimed that the cause of the high water, flooding, and resulting damages that we saw in 2017 and that we have seen this year has not been Plan 2014, but rather Mother Nature. Certainly precipitation and runoff have played their roles, but there have been massive rains and record snowfalls in the past, and yet these years have been, as we know, dramatically different on Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. Indeed, what has been different these years is Plan 2014. And the major question now is, how do we make it go away? As I have noted, I have been involved in lake level issues for a long time, seeking to stand against the powerful interests which regulate the waters in Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. And during these 26 years of efforts, I have continually observed how strong and powerful, moneyed and well-funded everyone else involved is, except the lakeshore riparians. As many non-lakeshore dwellers offering or venting criticism choose to claim that we lakeshore property owners are all so wealthy. So apparently one should think that we are all moneyed, well-funded, and financially equipped to stand collectively or individually against the onslaught of those who would wish to bring high water to and against us. Yet we are not all so equipped, or if we are, the collective joinder to fund intensive lobbying efforts on our behalf has never quite been adequate. Clearly, other stakeholder interests have effective overt or covert lobbying efforts and the financial means to support them. Shipping is a mega million-dollar or even mega billion-dollar industry with massive resources to assert its needs and interests, and hydropower too. The environmental interests are able to rely on resources gained through charitable organizations and charitable contributions as entities such as the Nature Conservancy strongly assert their desires. Even when seemingly grassroots, the environmental entities have well-funded offices, staffs, and budgets for their cause. For years, the environmental group Save the River had its office, albeit small, in Clayton, New York. Where, one might ask, is there an actual office funded to be dedicated to the interests and the plights of the lakefront property owner along Lake Ontario? While the environmental lobby seems to have gained victory with Plan 2014, the question may be asked whether that victory would have been achieved without considerable help from a governmental entity, most particularly, as noted, the involvement of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. For decades, it has been rumored that the agenda of the DEC has been to succeed in wiping lakefront property owners' homes and cottages off the New York State shores of Lake Ontario, with the land thereafter to become public lands of New York State. Some within our collective efforts have noted that they have even heard officials state this intention. Well, how could it really be so, one might have asked, and yet now we have Plan 2014. Plan 2014, created as noted by a committee meeting repeatedly behind closed doors, without public involvement or scrutiny, and apparently dominated by representatives of environmental concerns, including representatives of the New York State DEC. To understand how egregious that closed door aspect has been, it is important to review how the IJC's International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study was initially touted to be. Leading up to the year 2000, the IJC had announced that it had gained funding for a $20 million 5-year study to examine whether or not a plan of regulation could be adopted that was better than Plan 1958 DD. The International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study began in 2000 and was to be funded originally through 2005. Among the supposed beauties of that study was that all stakeholder interests would be involved in the study process, including shoreline and riverfront property owner interests, recreational boating interests, and environmental interests, to together with commercial navigation and shipping, hydropower, and municipal water intake and discharge interests. Of greatest beauty, it seemed, was that the public was to be integrally involved internally and from the beginning, rather than to be addressed only through public hearings after plan formulation had occurred. Along with the decision-making study board, consisting of 6 individuals from the US and 6 from Canada, the Public Interest Advisory Group, to be comprised of 12 people from the US and 12 from Canada, was formed, not as a decision-making group, but to be a conduit of information from the public to the study and of information from the internal workings of the study to the public. Transparency, so it seemed, with the public to be included and involved from the beginning, rather than to be faced with trying stridently and vociferously to shout down plans through public hearings scheduled only after plan formulation and presentment by the IJC. And as those of us on the PAG served throughout the years of the study, even as it continued for years past 2005, we traveled extensively to localities around the water basin, including Toronto, Ottawa, Niagara Falls, Messina, Cornwall, Ogdensburg, and St. Catharines, as well as to Washington, D.C., believing that each of us was working very hard to represent the public's interests with regard to the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study. I can tell you that on at least a few occasions, I began to wonder whether we were quite being co-opted, as I began to observe that some of those meetings were being scheduled and held at the very times that public meetings of the Army Corps of Engineers and the St. Lawrence River Board of Control were being held elsewhere, thus keeping some of us more vocal lakeshore property owners from speaking out as we long had done at those meetings. And to our concern, as we would listen at study board meetings, we began to hear pronouncements that Plan 1958 DD had long provided benefits to property owners along Lake Ontario. That whatever plan was ultimately to be proposed, it would inevitably cause damages to the south shores of Lake Ontario, both to protected properties and particularly to unprotected lands. That those damages were to be labeled less as damages and more as, quote, reductions in benefits. And that in any event, there would be no mitigation against or compensation for those damages or reductions in benefits, as neither the IJC nor any related government entities had funds to provide such mitigation or compensation. And when any of us spoke to counter or challenge such viewpoints and statements, it often felt like we're being viewed by individuals apparently in charge as each having 3 or more heads. And despite our efforts to question or challenge the science on which presumptions and decisions were moving forward within the study, and to assert that valuations of property were being skewed, as working groups within the study sought to minimize the values to be placed on damages to dwellings, structures, breakwalls, and lands, adequate adjustments in such valuations were never made. As the study was concluding, the study board made recommendations to the IJC as to formulation of a new regulatory plan, and the IJC rolled out to the public at numerous public hearings its first proposed plan resulting from the study. At almost every instance at the public hearings, the plans proposed that was strong negative reaction from the public. And yet, despite that negative reaction, the US chairperson of the IJC at one point wrote to the sitting US Secretary of State indicating that one such plan had universal support and almost no negative review. As we waited in fear for a pronouncement that such would be the new regulation plan, we heard nothing, and we began to hope that the IJC and the U.S. Department of State would ultimately push forward no change that would be adverse. Only after the beginning of the next U.S. presidential administration and the eventual selection of new U.S. IJC commission members did it seem that we, as lakefront property owners, were not to be in the clear. And as the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study was truly beyond being in an end, and it seemed that the IJC, commission members, staff, and consultants had not achieved what they evidently wanted, a new working group was formed, as noted, to meet behind closed doors and without true public involvement. And that is the group, stacked with representatives of environmental interests, that ultimately put forward Plan 2014. And so, contrary to certain misstatements and misconceptions, and as noted here by Dan Barletta, Plan 2014 was not a plan that came out of the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study. Indeed, as opposed to that study, which was touted, and I emphasize touted, to espouse and be guided by transparency, Plan 2014 originated long after the conclusion of the study through a working group that was not, to my understanding, a true part of the study, and which did nothing to espouse, but in fact counteracted principles of transparency. Plan 2014 disproportionately hurts the New York State lakeshore and the shoreline of Lake Ontario, apparently leaving the Canadian shoreline, as agreed upon, particularly by New York State's own representatives on the closed-door working group, far less damaged. The plan was put in place with no inclusion of mitigation or compensation to address the losses and damages which it will cause and has caused. The plan far deflated the valuations of the losses and damages. The plan was adopted, as noted, without transparency and without fair stakeholder and public input. And of crucial importance, by eliminating Plan 1958 DD's Criterion K, and by the substitution of ineffective trigger levels which continually move, Plan 2014 has eliminated the opportunity for and the ability of the River Board of Control, the day-to-day regulator of the lake and river system, to provide deviations to water flows to help avoid disaster being caused to the lake and river waterfronts. And so after more than 55 years of adherence, accommodation, and adjustment to the prior plan of regulation, both by regulators, landowners, and other stakeholders, we have been faced with this new plan, Plan 2014, passed through by IJC commissioners who were not in office during nor participants in the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study, and the State Department of an outgoing U.S. presidential administration in the last month of that administration, and after plan creation, totally behind doors that did not open for the public. As lakeshore property owners, residents, businesses, municipalities, and government leaders have grappled with the effects of Plan 2014, much has been discussed about what to do to combat against it. While some people have suggested suing the IJC, the fact is that the IJC is and has long been immune from suit. Given such diplomatic immunity, a civil suit against the IJC would be futile. As noted, the entity of which I have been president, the Lake Ontario South Shore Council, years before I was involved in the 1980s, sued the government over circumstances relating to flooding on Lake Ontario. Due to the immunity aspect, the representatives of loss were unable successfully to name the IJC as a defendant, and instead they sued the Army Corps of Engineers as representative of the US government and the New York State Power Authority as representative of the government of New York State. Here, I frankly suggest neither of those entities is the cohort in crime. And yet crime, it really is. If one does commence a civil lawsuit, such will be extremely costly, and government attorneys will undoubtedly paper the plaintiffs in efforts to cause total loss of funds, ultimately trying to succeed with dismissal of the lawsuit, as has happened in many civil actions against the Army Corps of Engineers elsewhere in the country. It will take great funding for such a cause to proceed successfully. Indeed, the lawsuit brought by loss created $86,000 in legal fees in the 1980s, only to be paid by a settlement in which little was achieved but payment of $25,000 toward the plaintiff's legal fees by the Army Corps of Engineers, and payment of $25,000 toward the plaintiff's legal fees by the New York State Power Authority, thus supplementing $20,000 in state funding and leaving $16,000 to be raised among Lakeshore property owners. And what was gained by that suit was but a pronouncement that a Lakeshore waterfront property owner has the right to sue the government for flood erosion and loss of property as an unconstitutional taking of property under the Fifth Amendment to the US Constitution without just compensation. Well, that's a nice pronouncement, but quite ineffective without resources to assert that right and or a non-immune defendant to sue. The question arises as to whether the immunity of the IJC extends to criminal prosecution. Indeed, I have asserted that it may be an open question, at least worthy of having some taxpayer-funded prosecutor consider making a good name for himself or herself by publicly contemplating bringing or even bringing such an action. Since the IJC commissioners made the decision to enact Plan 2014, knowing that it would cause and or fail to protect against the damages that have occurred, and thus with the specific intent to cause or allow those damages to occur, I respectfully argue that a crime has occurred and is occurring. To be frank, I have not met many individuals whom I perceive to be more deserving of the label criminal than the commissioners of the IJC who have recently left office. If someone takes action that causes harm to you or to your property, and the person commits that action knowing that it will cause such harm, that person has taken such action with specific intent, and the person's action is a crime. In that light, I have noted my views to the Wayne County District Attorney's Office and the Office of the New York State Attorney General, hoping for interest and bravery on their accounts. Well, I have focused much here on the circumstances that have shown a harsh dichotomy between what was touted and the intentions, seemingly for the good, of the IJC's International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River study, and the deceit and deception, co-opting, and even criminality that have been accomplished through the creation and adoption of Plan 2014, and the disastrous results that have ensued. Because of a fairly unique vantage point from which to make my observations, I continually endeavor to bring this perspective forward. On a more parochial level, I might focus on the devastating conditions arising in and around my own property and the properties of my neighborhood, where most homes are built on stilts and water surrounded and infiltrated those stilts and stood under our cottages for many months in 2017 and again stands there now. Or where I could even kayak completely around my neighbor's home if I wished to during several months in 2017 and now could again. and further where along the entire peninsula of Crescent Beach, Rochester Gas and Electric's power poles were compromised by high water and wave action and were either knocked down or were obliged to be removed, such that close to 60 of our neighborhood's homes were without power for as many as 5 months of 2017. If you were to read my public remarks stated at the IJC hearing held in Greece, New York on June 1st, 2008, and were to compare my efforts then to commend the workings of the IJC with my statements in 2017 and today, you would see a stark distinction in the realities of the moment. Just to note briefly from those remarks, I stated then, in reviewing the aspects that have gone into the proposal of Plan 2007, it appears that the IJC may be deserving of considerable commendation in formulating a plan for regulation that seeks to respect the interests of all of the greatly divergent stakeholder groups. To its credit, the IJC appears to have listened attentively to the concerns expressed by the various constituent interests and to have been conscientious, responsible, and careful in holding back from proposing a plan that clearly would cause severe detriment to the publicly and privately owned properties along the shores of Lake Ontario. That was my view of the IJC at that time in 2008, before the creation of its non-transparent and closed-door working group. Today you have heard my views of the IJC in the face of Plan 2014, expressed by me continuously since 2017. I wish to close with brief observation of the treaty that was noted, which created the IJC in the first place, the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909. Article 8 of that treaty is key. I would like to read from 2 paragraphs of that article. One paragraph is discretionary, the other paragraph is mandatory. The first paragraph reads as follows, quote, "The Commission in its discretion may make its approval in any case conditional upon the construction of remedial or protective works to compensate so far as possible for the particular use or diversion proposed, and in such cases may require that suitable and adequate provision approved by the Commission be made for the protection and indemnity against injury of all interests on the other side of the boundary." The second paragraph reads as follows, quote, "In cases involving the elevation of the natural levels of waters on either side of the line as a result of the construction or maintenance on the other side of remedial or protective works or dams or other obstructions in boundary waters or in waters flowing therefrom or in waters below the boundary and waters flowing across the boundary, the Commission shall require, as a condition of its approval, that suitable and adequate provision approved by it be made for the protection and indemnity of all interests on the other side of the line which may be injured thereby." So, a synopsis. Mandatory language as to what the Commission must and or shall do. The year 1909, the creation of the IJC and the rules by which it must act. The year 2000 to now, the Commission continually stating that it will not be providing protection, indemnification, mitigation, compensation, and then the IJC's approval of its plan without such indemnity and protection in place. And keep in mind, please, that the regulation of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River is largely conducted through the operation of dams, which span both sides of the boundary line, as mentioned. So, the year 2009. This issue has been going on for a very long time. I respectfully submit that the IJC has absolutely violated the very treaty that created it and that is meant to govern its actions. I want to thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to speak before you today. It is excellent to see a large group of people here in collaborative and shared desire to stand up for our rights as Lakeshore property owners. The need for our shared voice is critical, for we face such enormous damages and potential for future damages. In the past, our voice and the level of property owners' interests have ebbed, flowed, and waned as conditions have gone from critical to acceptable and comfortable. Nothing under Plan 2014 is acceptable or comfortable. Our voices need to be heard, shared, and in unison. But what do we do when all or so much seems futile? When we try the legal routes, the public advocacy and lobbying routes, the co-opting and pseudo-inclusion routes, and nothing seems to work, what do we do? Do we resort to civil disobedience? Do we stand up peaceably to authority with a willingness to take a risk? I am not advocating it, I am just raising the question. For I know that it goes to the very principles of action on which our country was founded. I also know, however, that forces nowadays work in ways that can shut down such action before it ever gets started. Please don't go home and go away from demonstrating interest in this fight. It is a fight, and if we do not win, our properties may be lost. I thank you very much for your considerate attention.
Thank you very much. Henry, getting to the core of the thing, what you're saying is we can't sue anybody, we can't gain anything that way?
What it takes is finding the right defendants. And as I say, the IJC is immune from suit. No reasonable sense of trying even to sue them. The Army Corps of Engineers has been sued before. I would say it's not the entity responsible for what's happening here.
I'm sorry. I was saying, the question was, do we not have someone to sue? And I was saying that as noted, the IJC is immune from suit. There is no possible sense in seeking to sue the IJC. The Army Corps of Engineers has been sued before. I told you.
Successfully.
Successfully in other parts of the country. And one of the issues, though, with respect to the Army Corps of Engineers, because I would suggest that it really isn't a culprit in this circumstance. It's not responsible for what we've got with the flooding in Plan 2014. It may be a underlying factor in it. In fact, it is an underlying factor, power generation. But the New York Power Authority didn't make that, and the Army Corps of Engineers, they didn't make those decisions. So one of the problems we have with respect to suing the Army Corps of Engineers is, yes, it's been sued in other parts of the country, but that's where it's strictly within the U.S. Here we're dealing with this U.S.-Canada international aspect. So what it takes is figuring out who's the right defendant to sue. And I'm a lawyer, but I'm a very small solo practicing lawyer. If I was ever thinking I could take on a case like this, I might as well go home and do something to change professions, but which would be a good idea probably. But so as Jim was saying, he's contacted certain attorneys' offices. They're likely very much more equipped to do the research and come up with who is the culprit to be sued and how to go about it, and then how to stand up against the huge amounts of onslaught of motions to dismiss, etc., that there will be, which although there have been success stories with suing with respect to water issues, there have also been many non-success stories where the plaintiffs have been put into the ground by motions to dismiss. So
So for 10 years, we're screwed.
I'm not the one to answer
No,
that.
no, absolutely not. We are gonna fight this to the death. We are gonna find a way to sue them. We're gonna find out who to sue, who we can sue. The IJC broke the treaty, okay?
Jim,
That's,
question.
yeah.
We really don't have time to sue anyone.
No, we gotta do it
Is
now.
there any way to override the treaty or override the IJC's decision? There's got to be
You know,
two
I don't know the answer to that question. The only person that could do that would be probably the president. Donald Trump could go say, you broke the treaty, we're gonna break the treaty, and we're gonna let the Moses Dam water out. Okay?
One of the issues with respect to the treaty is where to sue. And the aspect would be, one could go, there's something you may have heard of, the International Court of Claims in The Hague, Netherlands. Well, if one got some attorneys to be willing to take a case that went there, that would be a place to try to sue this international body and do something about
I'm
it.
just asking for a general, is there any way to overrule the IJC's decision instead of suing them?
Oh, and to the extent of my knowledge, and Dan might weigh in on this, the aspects of overweighing are the IJC's decision. One of the things we saw on the news just recently was this idea that the IJC new commission members were going into a meeting to consider whether they would reverse it. And then after that, there was a bit of news to reflect that no, it will take a great amount of time. So the IJC commission members can review what they've done or what the prior commission members have done, and then they could make a decision, which then would have to go out to the State Department.
I want Canada and I want the United States to step in and say, hey, look it.
Today.
You guys did it wrong.
Citizens in Canada are suing their government right now.
That's another suit. I'm talking override, like we need something now.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and one of the aspects that some of my remarks over time, a bit in this presentation, but some in my other presentations, have talked about what seems to be, sadly, the absolute futility of some of the efforts that we try to make. And think about it, Dan and I have been involved for close to 26 years. We've been fighting it for a long time. There are many others who have, but we've stayed with it a long time. And all of the efforts, I would commend the idea of bombarding with emails and whatnot, but we've a lot in a non-social media age. We've tried a lot, and now in a social media age, there has been a lot of bombardment, and there was in the study a fair amount of output of emails and presentations and attending meetings and speaking out, and the end result is what we've got. So it's really difficult to come up with what to do successfully to make it happen. And I commend Jim in putting together this type of rally to gauge and get support for this idea. There may be other ways to approach it in addition or other than suit too, but it's certainly a cause that has to be
Jim,
worked with.
we need an address where these could be mailed for anybody that's not here. Is that something you could display up here, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Your remarks were terrific, and it was so great to be able to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. I could, if you want to come up and give me an email address to send it to, I generally haven't put it out publicly, but I'd be glad to put it out individually to anybody who's interested.
Henry, speaking of great information, you had two great clauses in there. Can you put those in layman's terms? Because there's a lot of technical jargon in those clauses that you read.
The two from the treaty?
Yes. Can you put those in layman's terms? Because it was a little over my head. And
Yeah.
jargon.
Sorry to read from the treaty, but that's, and it is complex. But what it basically means to say is that what the steps that the IJC or its internal workings may take to raise the water level on either side of the boundary. And the boundary goes pretty much in essence, straight through the middle of Lake Ontario and straight through the middle of the St. Lawrence River. And then you get to the Moses Saunders Dam power complex in Cornwall and Messina, and 36 turbines stretch across the St. Lawrence River there, 18 of which are Canadian and 18 of which are US. And if steps are taken on by the IJC that raises the water level on one or the other side, and in this case, both sides, then they are responsible, the IJC, to take proper mitigation or remediation efforts. And they violated that because it says right there that they're supposed to do that. The water's been raised by their circumstances. They haven't acted to compensate for that. And they said all along in the study that they weren't going to. And it was a source of real frustration to some of us on the Public Interest Advisory Group. Dan?
The one thing that the IJC does, they change the terminology. We're not being damaged. We're having a reduction of benefits. That's how they get around it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the question is whether it'd be possible to get an injunction. And an injunction is an action through the courts meant to be fairly immediate, although it still takes time, but it's meant to deal with irreparable harm, which we're having, potentially irreparable harm, if not fully irreparable harm. And it involves about 4 components that you have to prove to the court, and then you can get somebody to be enjoined, injunctive relief, in essence, to be stopped. So that's one of the better approaches. If there was going to be legal action, it should involve an effort to get it to stop as immediately as possible. So, well, as I mentioned, I contacted the local office of the Attorney General in 2017, and they seemed, frankly, not to be very interested at all. Now I've heard some news that they may be getting involved. They weren't very interested then when little old me tried to suggest maybe it would be a good place for them.
We'll be filing a new complaint with the Attorney General's office within the next 2 weeks.
It seems to me that committee is relatively small. Is that an appointed committee or elected committee? And if it is appointed, who has appointed them?
When you say the committee, do you mean the IJC? So the IJC is very small for all that it is charged with doing and for all the power that it has. It has 3 persons from the US and 3 from Canada. One of those is a chairperson. Just within the last 6 weeks or so, the people, maybe less than that, those 3 people from the US were finally confirmed by the US Senate, having been nominated by the president probably over a year before, maybe not that far, but a good long time they sat waiting for Senate confirmation. So finally they got approved, and we were really, many of us who watched this were really hopeful that, gee, this was going to be a saving grace, because Congressman Collins from the Buffalo area, Erie County, he had claimed to get the person nominated as the chairwoman, Jane Corwin, a former assembly person. He had claimed that it was his doing that got her or somebody from Western New York on, let alone as chairperson. So we were really hopeful, even though there were others that we had been hoping might be appointed instead. But then she and the other commissioners made a tour, mostly in Greece, New York, and were quoted on the news all of a sudden as saying, well, Plan 2014, yeah, it's from Mother Nature, you know. So more of the same. So now they've, the new norm. So now they've at least notified the public that they were going to hold a meeting, which they held yesterday, I guess, at least by telephone. One of the agenda items was to see about reversing Plan 2014. But as the news is noted correctly, and we've noted, it will take a long time. It may not take 16 years or 15 years, like the study was 2000 to 2005, went on to 2008, and now it was 2017 when it was put in place. Is that all right with the machine?
So
No?
are they in for a certain amount of time?
So each time a new president comes in, and it's supposed to be the same with the Canadian Prime Minister, then basically they're going to be new appointees. But for the most part, like I think Obama appointee, Lana Pollock, who was the chairwoman, who couldn't have been more disastrous for our desires and interests and more outspoken against our interests. She stayed in for all of this time until 5 or 6 weeks ago under the current presidential administration, which was not hers. She stayed in as chairwoman. And so it doesn't move along very fast, but there are 3 appointees of the president in this country, confirmed by the Senate, and then 3 appointees. In Canada, they have a 4-year term. So, and now the Canadian chairman, he, on that tour through Greece, he was quite outspoken, saying that he believed that Plan 2014 was not the cause at all. So, and we need, in order for anything to be reversed, we need at least 4 of those 6 people to vote that way. And then that only starts a process where then it goes to the State Department and sits around for a while before anybody bothers to think that it's important enough to do anything. I'm sorry.
2 things. I have 2 questions. One is, it's my reading that if there is a dire situation, they can deviate from 2014. That was in the order of compliance. The other question is rather tricky. In 2017, people were able to get grants or maybe put in hardening of their shores. And they had to get approval from the DEC, also from the towns. Now, when somebody put in that sort of defense, the people next to them really got hit. I mean, because of my neighbors, I have really much more dire consequences. What is the situation when that was approved and they knew that when they hardened one person's shoreline, it was going to kill the next person's?
To the extent that I'm aware of those aspects, and I know just what you mean in my own area, where I had a natural shoreline and I was trying to hold off from putting boulders there, and it was sensitive to my neighbor. But I finally had to, having applied for the grant, I knew I had to do something, so I accepted that. Now she was up in the air, she was approved also, but she's gonna put rock in also. But it presents that problem that you're mentioning, and it's really, as far as I understand it, it's up to the individual property owner to decide what they're gonna do and if they're gonna take the action. And if the neighbor does something that's for their own benefits, seemingly.
But they sued DEC.
Well, the DEC isn't exactly, they approved the permit for it, but I don't know that one could say that they had an obligation to that neighboring property owner to not approve it, because then they're acting contrary to the interests of the person seeking making the application. So it really comes down to an individual property owner's circumstance. And your first question, though.
They haven't done it this year, for this year.
Your second question was about deviations. They can deviate. They're allowed to deviate from everything but the shoreline. The only way they deviate is if they hit the trigger. They can deviate for wreck boating on the river, for haul out in the fall. They can deviate for shipping. They can deviate for hydropower. They can't deviate, they will not deviate for the shoreline.
What action are you and your group taking now, and what do you suggest we do now?
Are you talking about the group that I've long represented?
Yes.
Well, it's not taking any specific action right now. I've kept it going, but I've also become involved with, as I say, Laura, which has a much greater social media or internet presence, and United Shoreline. So Lake Ontario South Shore Council stays in existence, and we work together with them, but I'm not seeking, nor would I have the auspices to seek to move something forward. I'm trying to cooperatively work with overall groups to see what we can do, but I keep trying to, best thing I think I can do is just keep advocating for telling the story and keep advocating for the aspects of what is available there. But I don't have anything per se that my group is seeking to do now. And if I was having to make a decision as to whether there'd be litigation from that group, I would have to say no. So it's really with the auspices of what Jim here can do, and bringing in a group like this is a pretty impressive group for short, quick communication.
Jim, as an organizational thing, I think that you should try to identify the areas, the communities, and get a leader in each community to help you disseminate the information and get the information out to people. And
Absolutely. Would you like to help with that?
Sure.
Okay, great. That's the reason I got Dan and Henry here, because we can't do this alone in Sandy Pond. It's got to be Rochester, Buffalo, Watertown, the St. Lawrence River. It's got to be everyone along the shoreline. Yes, sir.
I have a question for
Henry.
Henry. Your comments that you said that we could get a copy of.
Yes.
Those comments you've already sent to the New York State Attorney General in the hopes of getting something happening with them, correct?
Well, the comments I made today are a modification of comments that I've given before, including my testimony in November 2017, and Dan testified at that time also before a committee of the New York State Senate, and it was an ad hoc committee, including many senators who weren't on any specific committee together. But in any event, it was a public hearing by invitation, and those comments were submitted at that. And I've made various submissions along the way to the IJC and whatnot, and some of my speeches are on YouTube. If you
So those comments are on public record with the Attorney General as we speak, where if we were to try to go through with this injunction of some sort, could we reference what you've already sent to them and add to that, and would that add any merit or any momentum to the possibility of having an injunction granted?
Not necessarily. As I say, I'd be happy to supply you or anyone else who wants it with a copy of my remarks, but I haven't submitted those in this form or any written form to the Attorney General's office. As I say, I made inquiry of them. They seemed uninterested. I didn't follow through with something in writing to them per se.
And that's the New York State Attorney General. What about on the federal level? Because it is a constitutional issue too, in terms of what you stated about the Fifth Amendment.
One of the things that we find is frustrating in regard to action here and having people pay attention. When we watch the news, for example, it's quite common to see flooding circumstances in the Mississippi River, Missouri River, Tennessee, other places. They cover it. We haven't had any national coverage of the flooding in upstate New York. And to get somebody from the federal government to pay attention, it's hard. One of the problems we have too is just like banding people together. And as I say, we've tried for a long time. I tried with Lake Ontario South Shore Council before the internet age, was doing it really hard going along. We didn't get this far. We got to Oswego and United Shoreline. Someone mentioned United Shoreline. Well, they're doing a very good job, but they're not, except for a few people, I'm sure they don't have much presence up here. So it's a mammoth undertaking to get enough people banded together and not thinking parochially. And then you try to think about involving the U.S. government and getting them to pay attention. It's a daunting effort. So I think we have to either get a law firm to do something as Jim is recommending, do injunctive relief, or do the stepped up lobbying effort that the young woman was mentioning with respect to bombarding. people. But as I say, that bombardment has already occurred in one form or another, and this is what we've got at this point. They really don't listen to us. They don't listen to us.
What about, like, should we be doing a march on Washington or something to help to get them to listen to us? What do we do? I mean, you were talking about worldwide getting people to help fund this.
We're-
Syracuse people don't even know what's happening up there.
We're gonna be rolling out an action plan over the next several weeks. This was just the first baby step. Okay, we're gonna roll out an action plan within the next 2 to 3 weeks. It'll include other rallies, it'll include demonstrations, it'll include a whole bunch of things. I just don't have all that mapped out yet. I started working on this about a month ago.
Jim actually, I'm a friend of Jim's. My name is Bruce Ham. I offered to help him with this as well. One of the things that we've seen, as Jim said, this is our first meeting. We're learning a lot. As you could see, the room was overflowing. So we've heard a lot of good suggestions here today. We also can't do this alone. There are folks out there who maybe have some skill with databases. We're going to have to assemble a database. There may be folks out there who have skill with websites. As Henry said, social media did not exist when these first court cases came around, but it is a huge tool nowadays to
I have a
get
question
something.
about that. I'm just wondering how many people in here are on different, like, social media groups against this plan? Like, I'm in, I think, like 5 different Facebook groups, and they have great information, but they're not connecting with each other.
Right.
That's the goal, that's the goal of this organization, is to unite everybody along the shoreline. All the landowners, all the small business owners. That's the goal of this organization. Get all those splinter groups, those tiny groups, all along the lake shore, and bring them all together.
It's a huge question. You use Facebook, you use Instagram, which social media platform do you use? So these, yeah, exactly.
Protesters, David Muir comes from Syracuse. Maybe if he were contacted, he would be willing to put some focus on Lake Ontario.
That's another good suggestion. National media. Yeah, go. Hold down. Let one person speak. Please.
Since I came from the river and I didn't see too many here, that's a problem. There's a lot of money at the river. You want money? Tell me.
We know,
I'll get that money.
we know that. We're gonna be up at the river.
Can you make a note?
You're not getting the right people. Just like she said, I'm on how many groups? I'm an administrator of one of the groups, and I'm getting threatened by
Right.
these left side winners, you know?
Right, we need your help.
Well, I'm here, and that's why I came. I didn't want to come because I got a diver lost in Cornwall that I wanted to be working on too. So I'm divided with a lot of groups, but I am a retired big mouth bitch. And we gotta fight this, but we gotta do it together with more than just with
Folks like this lady who are willing to volunteer and step up, please contact Jim. Tell them what you are willing to do.
On the member application form, there's a place where you can circle what you want to do and what your skills are. So please fill that out. Yes, ma'am. We'll be doing another one, probably around Henderson Harbor, Clayton, somewhere up along the St. Lawrence.
Yeah.
And maybe another one here, I don't know. Hey, I promised Kathy Goodnow I would give her 5 minutes just to give us an update about the things that are going on locally here and some of the initiatives. So I'm going to do that.
Hi. Many of you know me. I'm one of the owners of Green Park Marina. I'm also the president of the Sandy Pond Channel Maintenance Association, and I am the member of the North Pond Resiliency Group to rebuild the barrier dunes. You also know our business has been devastated. In 2017, we rebuilt, we're destroyed again. the gentleman over here was correct. We need to get to our congressman, we need to do petitions, go to the president to get the plan changed. The plan stinks. It really does. But on the brighter note, the reason I asked is I wanted to spend some good news to the people here on the pond. And I realize that everybody is affected by the flooding. The North Sandy Pond Resiliency Group will be getting the permitting to start rebuilding the North Barrier Dunes, which have been destroyed. There's 3 or 4 breaches, which is letting more water into the pond. The town of Sandy Creek is going to be working with the REDI program from Governor Cuomo's office, which there's $300 million available for. Some of the funding will be coming here to help rebuild our dunes, and we need that. And along with speaking with that, the town of Sandy Creek will also be working with the septic removal system for the pond, which would be great for our environment, because we have to think long-term. If we're gonna spend the money, rebuild it, we have to have the plan 14 changed, then we can rebuild, but we need to have a septic removal system if we have the water. So that's all I really wanted to share, was a little bit of good news.
Take an application and duplicate it to your neighbors.
Yeah.
They're out of them. No, they're all